We agreed last time that we will study Pirkei Avot, because that's the season of Pirkei Avot, and we will explore it my way, paragraph by paragraph. That is, if that's what you wish. Otherwise we can go back again to other topics, such as the continuation of the commandments and so forth. But it's a fascinating subject because Pirkei Avot is a very interesting book if we learn it according to its historical aspect as well as its own moral values. Because the main reason why Pirkei Avot was given to us was in order to enhance our moralities, to make us become better. And we call it the book of Avot. Avot means the fathers. And why is it called the fathers? Why do we call it the book of the fathers? It's because the real fathers that we have are the fathers that teach us the law, teach us the Torah. The great sages of the generations are our real fathers, the fathers that bring us to the world to come, like the Talmud says. And also we find in the Bible about Eliyahu the prophet, that he had a disciple, another great prophet, maybe the greatest prophet of all, Elisha. Elisha Navi was the disciple of Eliyahu Navi. When the time came that Eliyahu departed from his disciples, so the Bible is drawing a picture that is memorable. For those who study the Bible, it remains in their mind as a vivid picture that Eliyahu goes up to heaven on his chariot, and that's how he departed from his disciples, from his disciple Elisha Navi, after he bestowed upon him the power to be the next Navi, the next prophet. At that time when Eliyahu was taking off, the Bible tells us that Elisha started to scream, Avi, Avi, Rechev Israel ufarashav. My father, the great chariot of Israel. Why did he call him my father? He is not his father. So we understand that the reason he called him his father, because Eliyahu was his Rebbe. He was his teacher. So therefore, from then we understand that a teacher can be also considered a father. And that's the reason why we call this book of Pirkei Avot the book of the fathers, because the sages of all the generations, as we are going to see, in every paragraph, one or two rabbis are going to tell us their moral dictums that teach us how to be better and better throughout our life. And because they are teaching us, that's why we call them our fathers. Amen. Last week we had a special lecture that's about the first paragraph, which in fact was not the first paragraph but rather the introduction to Pirkei Avot. So we discussed Olam Haba, the facets regarding the world to come, because this famous prelude to Pirkei Avot begins with Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. If you remember, we have discussed this in depth, in certain kind of depth. How is it that every Jew can gain his share in the world to come? The share is there. Only to have access you need the password. And the password requires a lifetime of spiritual values. So we start. Pirkei Avot begins by telling us the following. Moshe kibel Torah misinai, umsarah liYehoshua, vYehoshua lizkenim, uzkenim linvi'im, unvi'im mesaruha le'anshe keneset hagedola. In this first paragraph, we have also an introduction, a historical introduction, before we get into the advices of those great people. First, it tells us that Moshe, received the Torah at the mountain of Sinai. Everybody knows that. Moshe was the liberator of the Jewish people from Egypt, and he was appointed by God to go up the mountain of Sinai and to bring the Torah to the Jewish people. Since then, the Torah is our doctrine, the Jewish book by which we live. The question is, why Moshe? Why was he chosen for this tremendous position? To be not only the leader of Israel, but also the teacher of Israel. And why Sinai? Of all the mountains, the mountain of Sinai is a humble one. It's not a very impressive one compared to the Himalayas or the Mount Everest. The Sinai is nothing. So why was it chosen to have such a great honor, to be the place, to be the location upon which the Torah of God was given to the people of God? So we asked, why Moshe? Why Sinai? And the answer for both is the same.
Humility.
Humility. Very good. God loves humility. Moses excelled in this trait of characters, as the Torah itself gives the testimony about Moshe by saying, "Ve'ish Moshe anav me'od mikol ha'adam asher al penei ha'adama." And the man, Moshe, was the most humble man in this earth, on the face of this earth. When the Torah presents such a testimony, it means there could never be a person more humble than Moshe. And yet, how can you ask yourself, how can you be humble and yet a leader? I mean, a leader has to be haughty, right? A leader must be distinguished by his impressive way how to address the people. Sometimes might even be with some kind of arrogance. So how come we portray Moshe as the person who is the champion, the paroxysm of humility? And the answer, that's exactly what made him the most humble. Because he was the greatest leader and the greatest man, and yet in his heart he felt inferior to any human being. Because he loved, he adored every Jew, and he took care of everyone. I mean, a real arrogant person, he looks upon people from high. He is not concerned about them. The real ga'ava, the real haughtiness, is a very evil trait of character. That's the type of character that a guy does not even consider the plight of someone who is less than him. But a person like Moshe, who was concerned about the last and the smallest needs of the people of Israel, while being the king of Israel, at the same time he felt that everyone there requires his attention. Only God saw into his soul that this man is so humble and so good, because we do not know how to explain arrogance, how to explain pride. So we confuse pride perhaps with arrogance, maybe leadership with arrogance, and that's not true. Arrogance is definitely negative trait of character. But at the same time, pride is very important, because I'll tell you a little secret. God created pride, and God does not create anything that is negative. Everything is beautiful in the creation of God. So since God created pride, so what's so bad about it? And I'll tell you the truth, if it was not for pride, there wouldn't be Jews. There would be no Jews today. The only reason why Jews persisted stubbornly with Judaism, despite the pressures of society, it's only because of our pride. We are so proud to be Jewish that they cannot take that away from us. Despite the persecutions, the hatred, and everything that the Jewish people has gone through throughout all the generations, there's no nation that could have tolerated such a thing without at least passing to the other side. But the Jews kept to themselves this tremendous pride. We are the special people. Yes, we suffer, but we know that it's worth it because we are Jews, so we are special. That does not make us superior, like maybe some of the nations think that by being called chosen, therefore we are considered superior. That is not true. On the contrary, the Jewish people suffers for the rest of the world. We are not a victim really, but we, since we are the guide light of the nations, so we suffer because of the nations. And that does not make us arrogant. It makes us chosen, but at the same time, it makes us perhaps very humble. Now, I don't know if we can understand this very well, how humble the Jewish people is or not, but that's not what concerns us now. Moshe was exactly the figure of the Jewish people. He was the most humble man, and yet he is the one who projected the pride in being a Jew, in being a man who received the Torah at the mountain of Sinai. You see, the fact that we received the Torah at the mountain of Sinai has distinguished us from the nations. And that's the cause for all our troubles. The nations could not tolerate us wherever we were scattered all over the world, because we were different. We did not eat what they ate. We did not pray the way they pray. We did not learn what they learned. And therefore they did not like us. So you see, it would have been very easy to pass to the other side if it was not for that knowledge that each Jew knows inside him. Yes, it's true, it's not easy to be a Jew, but it's worth it. Why? We received the Torah. God chose us to receive His Torah. So Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe, who is the humble man and yet the greatest leader, as the Torah says, Veha'ish Moshe. You see, to be very humble when you are a nobody is not a big deal. Let's say a person who's very poor, nothing to offer, nothing to give to anybody, and yet he's very humble. Who's going to even find him interesting in that case? He's humble, of course he should be humble. But when a person is the richest, the most powerful, the wisest, the greatest in every sense of the word, and yet the most humble, that's humbleness. That's why the Torah, when it's describing Moshe as a humble man, it says Veha'ish Moshe. And the man Moshe, when the Torah says Ish, you are almost like a God. Like it says Hashem Ish Milchama. So only God is called Ish. And Moshe has been called Ish, the man, which means the great person, and yet so humble. That's how God judged Moshe to be the most humble man on the face of the earth. Why is that? Because he was the greatest man. At the same time, he felt concern for the smallest Jew, for the smallest creature, living creature. That's the kind of man that God chose to give in his hands the Torah for the Jewish people. He could not trust the Torah in the hands of anybody but Moshe. He knew that Moshe is going to do a good job. The job which consists of what? What is the job? When you receive the Torah in your hands, you have a big job. And the job is to teach it and to make sure it is transmitted to the next generations. It's not an easy job. If you make a mistake, one mistake, and you choose the wrong guy to transmit that Torah to the next generation, it's all finished. All it takes is one mistake to choose the wrong person. And then the Torah will stop from being transmitted. Finished. You see, like Yitzchak. Our father Yitzchak, if he gave the blessing to Esav rather than to Yaakov, there would be no Jewish people today. The same thing also with Moshe. If he gave the Torah to the wrong person, at the end of his life, when he had to choose someone to whom to give the Torah, to make sure that he will also give it after him to others appointees, then if he made a mistake in that, he would have been lost. So God could not give the Torah to the first person if he was not the greatest person on earth. And humbleness, why is it so important? Because by being humble, you are going to make sure that everybody knows. Do you understand? Did you understand? A person who is not humble is going to teach a lesson and he wouldn't care if someone did not understand. Okay, those who understand are okay. He did not understand, I don't care about him. That's what is called arrogance and conceit. But Moshe took care of everyone in a very gentle manner. In a very nice way, he made sure that everyone will understand. That's the right guy. And that's why God chose him to be not only the liberator of the Jewish people, because to become the leader of the Jewish people is not easy. You have to become a father. A father, it's not easy to be a father. You know, a father takes care of his own family and it's not that easy anymore. Imagine if he's going to become the father of millions of people. He cannot be a father unless if he feels like a father towards all of them. And only Moshe was found to be deserving of that. That's the reason why the Torah itself was given on a location that is also humble. Sinai, the mountain of Sinai was a lower mountain. Of course, the historians will tell you that the reason why he chose the mountain of Sinai is because if he gives the Torah at the top of the mountain of the Everest, who's going to hear? Right? So he prefers, so as though anybody can hear from the top of the mountain of Sinai. As low as it is, it's still impossible to hear unless if the voice is amplified. And we know that one of the miracles that happened when the Torah was given at the mountain of Sinai, that there was an amplification that was unbelievable. That every Jew heard the voice. And the voice, even of Moshe, when Moshe continued with the commandment, when he gave them to the people of Israel, his voice was amplified no end. Everyone heard it very, very brilliantly and succinctly. So the mountain of Sinai was chosen. Therefore, you must agree that the mountain of Sinai, why was it chosen? Because it is not very impressive. That's what Hashem wants. One of the reasons also why Hashem gave the Torah in the desert and not give it in a place which is already populated, such as in New York or something like this, shows the intention of God. That God wants tachlis, which means, I want the truth. I don't need about making impressions. That's not what is interesting God. God wants the truth. If the truth can be found even in the desert, let the desert be the place that He chooses. And how do we know that Moshe is the best? Moshe had children also. Let's say you are entrusted with the Torah in your hand. And you have raised children who are brilliant, great, scholars, and everything. And at the end of his life, normally, as great as he is, he would find no better person than his own son, than his own children to whom to give the Torah, which means to whom to give the leadership of the Torah. But Moshe did not do that. Moshe had great children. Gershom, Eliezer. They were also great teachers. For 4 years in the desert, they were teaching Sarei Asarot, Sarei Alafim, Sarei Meot, depending on the categories. And they appointed other teachers, but they were among the highest teachers of the Torah. So how come Moshe did not designate his own children to be the next generation, the next leaders of the generations of Israel, and to be responsible for the transmission of the Torah? Because Moshe was a man of the truth. He has a person who is even better. As good as his children are, if there is a person who is better than them, he will choose the other person. And by the way, that's why he chose Yehoshua. Why did he choose Yehoshua? Because the Torah tells us that Yehoshua bin Nun na'ar lo yamish mitoch ha'ohel. Yehoshua served Moshe. He did not separate from him, from the tent of study of Moshe, not 1 minute. He always attended to Moshe for all his needs and never separated from him. He absorbed the knowledge of Moshe to the best of his ability in his lifetime. Now, he was also a great man, no question about it. But at the same time, Moshe, out of appreciation to Yehoshua, and also as suggested by the Almighty Himself that he should choose Yehoshua, Yehoshua was the chosen one, the next leader to also be responsible for the Torah. If God forbid Moshe made a mistake and not choose Yehoshua, who knows what would have been the future of the Jewish people? We don't know. At that time, Yehoshua was the next best man. And yet, our sages said in the Gemara, in Masechet Eruvin, that there was a very big difference between Moshe and Yehoshua. Moshe was like the face of the sun, and Yehoshua was like the face of the moon. Pnei Moshe kifnei chama, ufnei Yehoshua kifnei levana. Oy lah leotah busha. What a shame it is that just from one generation to another there is already such a tremendous difference. Imagine what is the difference that between their generation and our generation. So that's the reason, as we have mentioned in past lectures, if we consider the ancient ones like angels, then we can consider ourselves like human beings. But if we consider them just like human beings, then we are just little donkeys. Not even like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, as the Talmud says. So you see, now Yehoshua is the next. So what does it say in Pirkei Avot? Moshe received the Torah. One more word about receiving. Because if you learn in depth the words of our sages, you have to find always something remarkable there. About Moshe it says kibel, he received. But it doesn't say about Yehoshua kibel. It does not say that Yehoshua received. It says that Moshe handed it to Yehoshua. Umesara li Yehoshua. Why is that? As we said that Moshe kibel, Moshe received, we should say and Yehoshua kibel mi Moshe. Why does it say that Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai? Umsara, and he handed it to Yehoshua? Because there is a very big difference between Moshe and Yehoshua. Moshe is the disciple of God himself. You know how he learned all the Torah from God? It's not that God said to him, say Aleph, and Moshe said Aleph. And God says, say Bet, and Moshe says Bet. That's not how it goes. Moshe absorbed, he closed his eyes, he was 40 years and 40 days and 40 nights at the mountain of Sinai, and he absorbed everything, every knowledge, every innovation of Torah, every chidush, every type of wisdom, he absorbed. That God bestowed upon him the knowledge of Torah to the maximum. No one in the world, in any generation, can say that he knows more than Moshe, because Moshe received it from God in a way that every kind of knowledge that is yet to be born, he already knew it. Because that's what happens when you are the disciple of God. When God conveys upon you something, he gives it to you in full perfection. But then when Moshe has to give it to Yehoshua, Yehoshua is not a disciple of God. He's not a student of God. He's the student of Moshe. That's the difference. Moshe is the student of God. Yehoshua is the student of another human being. Therefore, there is going to be a tremendous difference. Moshe absorbed it. But now to give it to Yehoshua, Yehoshua cannot absorb it. You don't absorb. You just listen and try to remember and memorize whatever you can. Right? But at least here he took charge of the Torah to appoint the right teachers and to continue and to make sure that the Torah is not forgotten. That's the reason why it says Moshe kibel sarah li Yehoshua. Yehoshua was not mekabel, did not receive, did not absorb, but it was handed to Yehoshua, and now the generation is much lower, still much higher than us, no end. We know that Yehoshua, after the death of Moshe, before Moshe died, he already bestowed upon him the honor, the smicha. He ordained him. Like it says in the Torah, V'samach Moshe et yadav alav. That he put his hands on his shoulders, and that's how he ordained him. And then Moshe departed, and he went to the mountain when he passed away, as everybody knows. Now Yehoshua is the new leader. He is now responsible for the Jewish people to enter the land of Israel. He is also the general, not only the chief rabbi of Israel, but he is also the general. And some general he was. He was the greatest general of all. He made sure that the Jewish people was worthy of being Jewish. In his time it says in the Bible, V'Yehoshua bin Nun, it says in the Bible, in the book of Devarim, V'Yehoshua bin Nun maleh ruach chokhmah. He became filled with the spirit of wisdom. Ki samach Moshe et yadav alav. As soon as Moshe ordained him and he put his hands over him, suddenly a spirit of wisdom invaded the system of Yehoshua, and now Yehoshua became a tremendous leader as much as he was a great teacher. But you see, what happened in the life of Yehoshua? There is one pasuk in the book of Yehoshua that tells us that Yehoshua was the right choice, that Moshe did not make a mistake. It says in the Bible, in the book of Yehoshua, I'm quoting from Yehoshua chapter 24, Vaya'avdu Yisrael et Hashem kol yemei Yehoshua. And the Jewish people worshipped God all the days of Yehoshua, which means without exception. There was no such a thing as one Jew religious and another Jew less religious or more religious. All of them worshipped God with the utmost perfection. Not only, the leadership of Yehoshua was so effective as a spiritual leader that it affected also the next generation of the Zekenim, the elders that lived after Yehoshua. They were also so much impressed by Yehoshua that even in their days, no Jew failed to be a good Jew. All of them worshipped God to the best that could be found in those days. And that teaches us that Yehoshua was the best choice, and Moshe was right to convey upon him the honor of the leadership as well as of the transmission of the Torah in his hands. After Yehoshua, Yehoshua Lizkenim, then a new generation started for the Jewish people. Now the Jewish people are in the land of Israel. At that time, the Jewish people lived with tremendous peace and serenity. working the land, the Holy Land of Israel, but at the same time learning their Torah. It was a time of peace, a great time for the Jewish people. Absolutely no interference from Goyim. The Jews then, they didn't know anything but Hashem and their Torah, and that's it. Like it says in the Pasuk, Ish tachat gafno v'tachat te'enato. Each one under his fig tree or in his vineyard. Total peace. Then started a new era. The era of the Zkenim, which according to our sages means not only elders, but it means the judges. The time of the judges. We still have no kings. The Jewish people were on a high level. As long as they were on a very high level, they did not need any king. Before the era of the kings was the era of the judges. Like it says in the book of Ruth, that we will read on the day of Shavuot, Vayhi bimei shefot hashoftim. And it happened in the days when the judges judged. Those judges were not only the great leaders of Torah, they were also the leaders of the generation. First one was known as Otniel ben Kenaz. He was the first judge of Israel after Yehoshua. As a judge, he definitely excelled immensely in the knowledge of Torah, because he tells us that after the death of Moshe, you know what happened? The Jewish people were so demoralized. The death of Moshe was traumatizing so much. It traumatized the Jewish people that many of them lost the knowledge of at least 3,000 laws of the Torah. At least 3,000 laws were forgotten when Moshe was dead. The trauma. They did not think that a man who has performed such great miracles would ever die. They did not think that Moshe can die. But Moshe also has to die. Even a person, the only person who saw the face of God, he still has to die. So therefore, the Jewish people then were completely demoralized. That caused a certain confusion, and they forgot 3,000 halachot, Jewish laws. And only the great scholarship of the next judge, Otniel, the son of Kenaz, with his great and sharp way and his great and sharp studies, he was able to bring back the knowledge of those 3,000 laws and bring again back the Torah to its original perfection. And that was the story about the first judge, Otniel, the son of Kenaz. Then there were other judges. Among them was Shimshon, the famous, the strong man of the Jewish people. Everybody regards Samson as a man of muscles, and that's all. But how many people know that in fact Shimshon was a great Torah leader? He was a man of great scholarship. But that nobody pays attention to that, because he impressed the Jewish people so much with his tremendous power. But you know the story of Shimshon. God gave him a very special supernatural power in his body to rescue the Jewish people from the Philistines. The Jewish people then suffered from the Philistines, the neighboring nation, a big empire that was harassed the Jewish people for many years. Up to the time of King David, they were fighting the Philistines all the time. Only at the time, the Philistines really were defeated 1,000,000 times. They tried again and again, and they were defeated again and again. In the time of Shimshon, of Samson, oh boy, what did he do with them? Of course, our lecture is not to tell you about the history of Samson. Maybe another time. Maybe we will learn also the history of each one of those great men as brought in the Bible. But that's another type of lecture. But Samson was one of the judges, one of the Shoftim. We had also Ehud ben Gera. We had also Gidon, the famous Gidon. Remember Gidon? It tells us in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, that Gideon with just how many people did he take with him? 300 people. And with them, with 300 people, he defeated all the army of Aram. And how did he choose those 300 people? He asked all the people of Israel to go ahead and drink from the river. Those who bowed completely on their knees and they drank from the water in such a way, bringing their mouth into the water, were not chosen. But those who brought the water into their mouth, they took the water like this and they brought it into their mouth, said, those are the people that I will take to fight the people of Aram. Of course, what we mean is that because there was such great influence in the time of worshipping idols, that who knows? He says, by going in such a way, it shows a certain kind of habit as prostrating before idols. So he did not choose them. He chose only those who were of finer character, and he had only 300 people. With them, he defeated the camp of Aram with such a subtle way that's unbelievable. In the middle of the night, he came upon the camp of Aram, and he terrorized all of them to a total defeat. That's Gideon. We know also about Yiftach, talking about the judges. Those are known as by the term Zekenim, the elders that came after Yehoshua for at least 200 or 300 years. They were the leaders of the Jewish people. And each one of these great leaders was also the man chosen to transmit the Torah and to be responsible for the continuation of the Torah, so that the Torah should not be forgotten. You understand that? If they did not do that in the beginning, we would have no Torah today. Then we had the story about Yiftach HaGiladi. Yiftach, who defeated also the army of Ammon. And he became the leader of Israel, even though in the beginning he was a nobody. But because he was appreciated by the sages of Israel then, they appointed him. And the story of Yiftach is quite great. And you have to read the Bible in order to know those stories. Then another one is Boaz. Boaz is the one who married Ruth. Remember Ruth? We are going to read about her on the day of Shavuot. She married Boaz, and Boaz was one of the judges of the Jewish people. And then, by the end of the era of the judges, we had, in the time of Shaul HaMelech, the Jewish people were not already on the same level. They were down a little. And they started to have all kinds of fears. Now they want a king. Before that, the Jews did not feel that they need a king. Because why do you need a king? To impose upon you the law, right? You need a king, that by the fear of the king you have to do what has to be done. But before the era of the kings, the Jewish people, you didn't have to tell them anything. Like the Bible tells us, Ish kol hayashar be'enav ya'aseh. Each one of them was trusted to do the best in life. There was no such a thing as rebuking a Jew or something. Each one of them knew what to do, and they did only what is best to do. But by the time of the end of the era of the judges, the Jewish people started to change a little, and they demanded from the prophet Shmuel to anoint a king. We need a king to unite us and also to impress upon us things that we have to be impressed for. And Shmuel, of course, God did not like that, but he allowed it. He said, you want a king? Fine. I'll give you a king. So Shmuel, the prophet, at the end of the judges, already began the next era of the prophets. And that's what Pirkei Avot tells us. Yoshua gave it to the Zkenim, and then the Zkenim to the Nevi'im. The elders, which are the judges, transmitted the Torah up to the era of the prophets. And the first prophet was Shmuel. he was also the greatest prophet that we ever had. In the beginning, he appointed Shaul to be the king. The king, Shaul, was great in the beginning. But then he sinned. The story of Shaul is known. At the end, he lost his mind. But we know that at the end of his life, it was David, the chosen one. And he married the daughter of Shaul. And he was the king of Israel, by whom now the Torah, the transmission of the Torah was through the hands of David. And King David, not only was he a great king of Israel, but he was also a judge of Israel, and he was also a great Torah leader, a man who appointed many courts of Torah to assure and guarantee the future of the Torah in the hands of Israel. So King David was in charge now. It was a great era. Of course, the Jewish people then adored David. David is the hero of Israel, especially after he defeated Goliath. When he defeated Goliath, then the Jewish people started to sing his praises. They knew that God is with him. And David was the first king, the first real king of Israel, who is the true king of the future of Israel also. Because the Mashiach is also the king, that is scion of David. That's why we call him Mashiach ben David. The era of David was the era of the kings. So we had David, after him was Shlomo HaMelech. David gave us the book of Tehillim, another book that's his contribution to the Torah, a great book that up to today the Jewish people is always reading the book of Psalms and praying to God through the book of Psalms, going to the Wall of Lamentations, the Kotel HaMa'aravi, with the book of Psalms. And who does not know the book of Tehillim of David? And yet David himself, committed certain errors in life, but he showed us the power of Teshuvah. Through the book of Tehillim we understand that one can change also to the best. You could be a sinner in the beginning, but you could always repent and become better. Through King David we know that there is such a thing. And he gave us a son who is a luminary of the Jewish people and a great teacher of the Jewish people. A person by whom the transmission of the Torah was further facilitated. King Solomon. King Solomon, not only he taught the Torah to the Jewish people day by day. I forgot to tell you that King David was also a teacher of Torah. Every morning, the Talmud in Masechet Brachot tells us that people would come to him for all kinds of very complicated questions. He was so sharp in his learning that he was able also to distinguish between one blood and another. A blood. Women would come with their blood and to tell them, are we tameh or not? Am I impure? Sometimes blood does not come only from the uterus. If it comes from the uterus, then she is impure. But sometimes it comes from something else. Sometimes it was confusing. They didn't know it was not at that time of the period, and so forth. So at that time they went to David to know. They brought him the color, and he has to know from the color, he has to know whether it is a blood that is kosher and blood that is not kosher. By the way, this is something that we learn. You can take a course, 3 months course to learn this, by the way.
What? Nowadays?
I always refused to take it. I didn't want. But some of my friends, they add this upon their rabbinical obligations. Yeah.
Nowadays?
You have to be a rabbi, of course. You have to have knowledge in the laws of Nida and so forth.
It says Achipolet, right?
Of course, nowadays. By Mechut and Rabbi Al Chaimov, many times they come to him to show this. Whatever. Yes?
It says in the Masechet Brachot, you were saying Achipolet was his name?
No, Achitophel.
Right.
Achitophel was the Rebbe of David. He was the one who taught. That's why David called him Rabbi Alufi Yudai, my Rebbe, my champion. And yet Achitophel himself committed an abomination at the end by joining Adoniyahu against David. But that's the story of the Bible. One day we'll give also a history lesson. In the meantime, we are doing Pirkei Avot. But this introduction is very important for us to know how the transmission of the Torah was effectuated throughout the generations. So from Moshe to Yehoshua, from Yehoshua to the era of the judges, one judge to the other judge, and then to the era of the prophets, and then to the era of the kings. And even though the kings do not appear in Pirkei Avot, that is because the Nevi'im, there were prophets at the time of the kings, and that is included already in the word Nevi'im that we have mentioned here. But even after the kings we had prophets. I mean, there were prophets even after the destruction of the first temple. After the first temple we had Yeshayahu, we had Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, we had all the big prophets, all the 12 prophets of Tre'asar, Amos, Habakkuk, Zechariah, Malachi, Haggai. And all those were not only prophets, they were also in charge of the transmission of the Torah to the next generations. And that's how the Torah was kept clean, without adding one word nor taking one word from it, because of those great people who were in charge. Finally, at the end of the era of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, and that was after the destruction of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, in the year 586 before the common era, then began a new era for the Jewish people. As mentioned in previous lectures, the Jewish people were now in some kind of dismay. After the destruction of the first temple, for the first time, the Jews lost their first commonwealth. And now they are scattered. They are first taken to be among the Goyim. Nebuchadnezzar took them to Babylon. A few remained in Israel, perhaps not in the beginning, but only after, when they came back. But now the Jewish people is in disarray. What happens when it is a time of confusion? The Jewish people never dreamt that there could be such a thing, that the Bet HaMikdash, the house of God, that was built by King Solomon, should be destroyed. There were many Jews who practically lost their faith because of that. So there was a time of great sadness and great confusion. In the time of King David and King Solomon and all the time of the kings, Jews prayed, not from the book. They didn't have a book of prayers like we have. Each one prayed his way to God. Each one knew what to pray, because they were on a higher level than us. But then after the destruction of the temple, there was fear that the Jews are going to forget, especially that they were taken in captivity in Babylon. Of course, there were great leaders in Babylon also, like Daniel, like Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, the famous people who were thrown in the furnace of the fire by Nebuchadnezzar, and yet a miracle happened that they came out unscathed. Those were also among the teachers of the Jewish people. And because of them, thank God, whatever was there was salvaged, and the Torah was kept also intact. But you have to understand that there was a time of confusion. People started to forget how to pray to God. People started to forget a lot of their learning. So, thank God that even in times of darkness, God remembers us, and He sends us always someone. There is always somebody in the generation that rescues the generation. At that time, we had several great people, but the greatest of all was Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe. When he saw the situation, the alarming situation, Jews in Babylon, and then in Persia, and then the king of Persia allowed the Jews to go back to the land of Israel to rebuild Bet HaMikdash, and only 50,000 joined Ezra HaSofer and Nehemiah to go and build again the land of Israel, the second temple. So Ezra started a very big convention that made of 120 rabbis. Each one of those rabbis was a luminary by itself, many of them were practical prophets, like Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Also Mordechai, the uncle of Esther. Famous story of the Bible, Esther. So her uncle Mordechai is also one of the great Sanhedrin, of the men of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the great assembly. 120 rabbis, each one of them could perform miracles. And they were convened by Ezra HaSofer and given the right to be responsible for the Torah, for the teaching of the Torah to a scattered nation, and a nation that is now wounded very much. The Jewish people lost the temple, and now they are wounded, and if somebody does not take care of them, everything will be lost. And Hashem gave us Ezra, who our sages say in the Talmud, Ezra was almost like Moshe, another Moshe Rabbeinu. And he rescued the Jewish people. He found so many thousands of Jews that took non-Jewish women, and they started to desecrate Shabbat. So he organized a very big campaign, and he gave a famous speech that is brought in the book of Ezra, in the Bible, of course. And we know from that story that all of them, by the thousands there, they sent away their wives, the non-Jewish wives, and they made a very big teshuvah in which they cried and they fasted, and now the Jewish people is again back to itself. That's the era of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. For at least 500 years, the leadership of the great assembly of 120 rabbis were responsible for the transmission of the Torah and responsible for the Torah to remain intact, unscathed by the events that the Jewish people was falling into throughout those generations. Up to the generation of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was a great man, a great leader also. As I said, God always brings someone, a luminary that rescues the Jewish people. By the year 2300 before the 2300 years ago, that was at the time when the temple, the second temple, was already in existence, and the Jewish people were also in their land when they came back from Babylon. And during those times, those 500 years of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the great assembly, they made sure, as I said before, that the Torah is not forgotten. But they made sure that they also, we will not forget, they made sure they write down the text of the book of prayers. The text of the Amidah, the silent prayer that we have, comes from the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, from the great assembly. That's how we know how to pray to the right word, because you have to know that those words are a great combination, Kabbalistical combination, that has tremendous secrets that allow the prayer to go up to the ears of God, so to speak. Until the time of Shimon HaTzadik, in the time, by the way, when the leader of the world, the conqueror, was the Alexander the Great, the Greek king who conquered practically almost the whole world. That was the time of Shimon HaTzadik. But we will now revert to the first paragraph, and then when we come to the sayings of Shimon HaTzadik, we will also say a few words in the history of the life of Shimon HaTzadik. But up to Shimon HaTzadik, that was the time of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the great assembly. After the great assembly, the time of the great assembly was over, then the Torah was transmitted to Shimon HaTzadik, and then he gave it to his student Antignos, the man of Socho. When we come to him, we will also discuss a little bit his life. And then a new era of Zugot. For 5 generations there were 2 leaders, rabbinical leaders of Israel. In every generation there were 2 rabbis, like today, chief Sephardic rabbi and chief Ashkenazi rabbi. And then after we have only the time of the Mishnah, the time of the great sages of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So, but we have to stop right there at the time of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. the men of the great assembly. After this introduction, historical introduction of the Pirkei Avot from the first paragraph, now our sages of the great assembly are going to give us a few messages. Hem ameru shlosha devarim. They said three things. Hevu metunim badin. Be patient with the law. We will explain that. Second thing, ve'amidu talmidim harbe. Make sure that you have many students. Make sure that Rachmin will make many phone calls to call people to come and learn Torah. And the third thing that Anshe Knesset HaGedolah are telling us is a memorable one, a revolutionary one. Va'asu seyag la Torah. And erect a fence around the Torah. Before I explain those sayings, first I have to tell you that the Anshe Knesset, the men of the great assembly, did not tell us only three things. They told us millions of things. But what is this that they gave us three things? I have to tell you that in those times the great assembly was concerned about the future, about the Jewish people. How can we guarantee? That was the primary concern of the great leaders of Israel after the destruction of the temple. Throughout at least 500 years, they were afraid that something is going to happen to the future of the Jewish people. And make no mistake about it, the future of the Jewish people depends entirely on the Torah. Take away the Torah from the Jewish people, you have no Jewish people. That they knew. So they knew that the transmission of the Torah must be done with the utmost precision, choosing the right leader, choosing the right academies, and to make sure that we teach those laws and those Torah to the next generations. That was their primary concern. So they started to develop all kinds of ideas that will guarantee the future, the Torah future of the Jewish people. So first, they said the first suggestion, Hevu metunim badin. I told you, we are going to learn Pirkei Avot my way. And that's not chas v'shalom that I am presumptuous in this. Only to show you that there is a system. You know, many people, they study Pirkei Avot just for its words, and that's it. But they should know that there is a great system there. There is a system that provokes the imagination. And we should understand why is it that they told us those things. We know that the great assembly had many other things to tell us. But this, what is written in the Pirkei Avot here in this first paragraph, those are the first three suggestions that were chosen by them to ascertain and guarantee the future of Israel with the Torah of Israel. The first thing is Jewish law. They said, Hevu metunim badin. Never be hasty to decide a Jewish law. Somebody is asking you a question, I will tell you the answer tomorrow. Do not answer on the spot. Today I know that people come to the Rabbi, Rabbi, what is the law about this? What is the law about this? And they expect him to give the answer on the spot. Well, the Rabbi didn't know, under the pressure of people, so he gives the answer and that's it. But the real answer is when he tells you, come back tomorrow, I will give you the proper answer. That's the way it should be. Like it says in the Torah, in the Tanakh, Dinu laboker mishpat. Always before you come to a conclusion with a judgment, let one day pass. Let's see what the next morning will tell us. There's always a change of mind. So after we try another day, then we know the decision will be much better. So Jewish law has to be, first what they meant by that Jewish law must be learned with precision and patience. Hevu metunim badim. There is another interpretation to this saying that has to do with what I said before. How do we guarantee the future of the Jewish people? So they said, Hevu metunim badim. Let us be patient when it comes to Jewish law. Which means, in those ancient times, not everybody learned Torah. In fact, up to the time of Rabban Gamliel HaZaken, not everybody was sent to yeshiva. They were choosing the people. You learn Torah, you don't. You go to work, this one will come to you to learn. They were checking also the character of everyone with minute details to find out if his character is also good, then he's fit to learn Torah. But if his character is not perfect, leave him alone. That was the ancient way. But little by little, when the Jewish people started to go, in other words, to be confused a little more, it's unlike the brilliance of the days in the time of King David, or so in the times of the kings and the prophets, when everything was clear. In those times they have to make sure that we understand. So who's going to make sure that the Torah, as God chose Moses, He chose him because of his wonderful character. So therefore they chose also students of Torah to be sent to the academies of Torah only if they prove to be of great character. But that was only in ancient times. In the time of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the great assembly after the destruction of the first temple, they could not go on with this. They said, we need now the future of the Jewish people. We cannot allow ourselves to distinguish between one and another. Let everybody go to the Torah. Let everybody learn Torah. And then God will decide which one is best, which one is not. But in the meantime, give the possibility to everyone to go to the academies of Torah. Everybody knows that in the time of Hillel, not everybody was taken to the yeshiva. And it was Hillel who was one of the first who made a breach in this decision and decided that everyone is welcome to come to the yeshiva. On the day when he made that decision, they added to the house of study 400 benches upon which people sat to study Torah. So now the great assembly understood that this is the time. You know, sometimes today, even in schools, they do the same thing, in yeshivas. When they see somebody coming from a bad background, so they don't accept him. Perhaps they are making a big mistake. Because our sages said, be careful that even from the poor people you could get the greatest luminaries. Some of the greatest rabbis came from a very low background. So therefore, how should we know? Therefore, let everybody to have the opportunity to learn. So therefore they said, be patient. I'm not saying he says that you should accept even an idiot or a criminal. No. But at least be patient before you come with a decision. That's one of the interpretations of the Hevu metunim badin. And the second suggestion of the great assembly was Veha'amidu talmidim harbe. The same thing, following in the system. Make sure you have many students. Only if we have academies full of students, hundreds of them, you could assure yourself that you have a future. But if you are going to be choosy about the students, as I said before, how can you assure the continuation of the generation? How you can be sure only if you have 1,000, then you say that one of them will come out good. But you have to have 1,000. That's what our sages said. That in 1,000 there is always one that will be a luminary. That's the whole point. But if you are so choosy that you have only 10 in the yeshiva, maybe you will be disappointed and not even one will come out. Therefore, the suggestion that now we have to accept many students. And finally, the third resolution of the Great Assembly to assure the continuation of the Torah is a revolutionary idea. Va'asu seyag la Torah. Allow me just 2 more minutes before I conclude. Let me explain that. Erect a fence around the Torah. What is this? What is to make a fence around the Torah? Until then, the Torah consisted of the book of the Torah as we know it. That's all. There were many other traditions that were known by heart. But the main book of knowledge of the Jewish people was the Bible. But now the sages realized that we are not on that level anymore. We are on a much lower level, therefore we require more studies. See how it goes? We think today that more studies make you a greater scholar. But by the Jewish people it's totally the opposite. That in those times when they had less books, that's because they had a higher mind, a much greater level of learning. That they knew the depth of everything. We require to learn 1,000 books before we know the depth of something. But they knew the depth of everything in the Torah much, much better than us. So therefore they said they were afraid what's going to be now with the laws of Torah. The laws of Torah, if they are not in the hands of the great leader like Moshe and all the others that came after, the laws might be changed. You know, the time changes. And with the changes of time, people are going to take the Torah in their hands and say, well, the Torah is not, the law as it is, this law must be changed. Why? It does not fit today. Don't you think they have done it in the last few hundred years? I mean, even today they still do it. The reform movement. This is what happened. They change everything according to the needs of the time. And then they are left with what? Nothing. The truth is that the Torah is the answer for every kind of time. Only you have to learn how. You understand? So therefore, what did they say? They said, "Va'asu seyag la Torah." Let us build a fence around the Torah. How did they? What is this fence? When you build a fence around the garden, then you make sure that no elements will come and cause any damage to the fruits and the plants inside the fence, right? The same thing also. Let us create a fence around the Torah. How? By producing other laws that come from the sages for the purpose to preserve the 613 commandments of the Torah. By producing new understanding of the laws of the Torah, which will bring us other kinds of laws that came only from the sages, this will permit the inside, the one that is inside which is enclosed in that garden, will be kept properly. And that's how the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud originated. That's how we have the laws of Rabbanan. We have so many laws on Shabbat that do not pertain really only to that law that is written in the Bible. And some people complain, who cares about what the sages say? All I need is to what the Torah says. And they don't understand that the Torah already meant, at the mountain of Sinai, that single verse of the Torah meant also all the interpretations of our sages around it. Why? Because it was meant to preserve it. Therefore, it is definitely kosher. The Reform movement, 150 years ago or so, they decided, no, we don't have to go by the sages. We have to go only by the Torah. Today, not even the Torah is kept by them. Right? If you keep at least the Torah, at least you will keep kosher, right? A Reform rabbi does not keep kosher. In the meantime, he removed the Torah. At the same time, he says, why do we remove those laws of the sages? Because we don't believe in them. So now you don't believe in the sages, so you don't believe in the Torah also. And that's why we understand today perfectly that if we don't believe in the oral Torah, you don't believe also in the written Torah. If you remember, we learned that we have two Torahs, one oral and one written. The written is the 5 books of Moses, and the oral Torah is the Talmud, all the books that we have today. But you will see that hundreds of laws were added just for the purpose to preserve the Torah. Every law of the Torah has many derivations, and those derivations guarantee the survival of that law. And that was the best suggestion that was made by the Great Assembly to assure the future of the Torah. If it was not for that, imagine, if the Torah, like in the time of King David, there was no interpretation, only the book as you see it, with their great mind, of course. But at the same time, if it was left to be in our time as it is, there will be no Torah today. In fact, 2,000 years ago, when in Jewish history, you know that there was 10% of the Jewish people that were the Tzdukim, the Sadducees, about which we will talk next week, God willing. We will talk about the Sadducees. This 10% minority of the Jewish people, consisting of the richer and the strongest people among the Jewish people, who become very irreligious because they refused to accept the laws of the sages. So what happened to them? They ended up to become Christians. And that's how, and the destruction, of course, of the second temple, we shall discuss this for next time. You will understand what happened due to a certain teaching that we will learn next week. But you see what happens? The reason why our sages gave us the Talmud and all the Torah around it, and all the interpretations and all the derivations and all the extra laws that have to do with every single law of the Torah, it's all for one purpose: to preserve the Torah, to be intact as it was from the day Moses gave it to us. And you know, according to the historians, the text of today's Torah, of the Torah that we have, that we hold today, is exactly, not even an iota is missing, the same Torah that Moshe gave us at the mountain of Sinai. And what was this stratagem that caused these extraordinary things to happen? How is it possible that we kept it? I mean, there's no such a thing that after 3,200 years that it would stay so perfect. This happened only because of the decision of the Great Assembly, who told us to erect a fence around the Torah. That's how we protected the Torah, by having other laws of the sages. Now we know that part of the Torah is the laws of the sages. And indeed, that's what we learn every day, and we discover more and more that every small pasuk of the Torah, in fact, is a source of tremendous wisdom, as reflected in the teachings of our sages. So that was the three decisions of the Great Assembly that practically made a magical turn in throughout the centuries of the Jewish people, and how the Torah was kept up to today with perfection. The next paragraph will teach us the moral teachings of Shimon HaTzadik, and the next one will be Antignos, his disciple, and we shall discuss further some historical points about these great passages of Pirkei Avot. So we will bring this to a halt for now until next week, in Yirtzeh Hashem. I would like to dedicate this lecture that we have said tonight for the good health of our dear friend, Dr. Eliyahu Ben Sivya. Hashem yishlach lo refuah shelema l'ramach ivarav l'shasa gidav. Ana el na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo. בזכות התורה תגן בעדו, יאריך ימיו בטוב ושנותיו בנעימים, יכללו בו כל הברכות כולם, וכן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן. Also מי שברך עמותינו, הוא יברך את הגברת היקרה, מרת סוניה, בת רבי דוד ביטון, הידועה כסוליקה שולמית בת חנינה. השם ישלח לה רפואה שלמה, לרנה בבריה עוד שעשה גידיה, וגם
ולעילוי נשמה שמואל בן חפצי,
ולעילוי נשמת שמואל בן חפצי. And for the good health of everyone assembled here tonight, and remain in good health always. Amen.